Could I please request everybody to stand for the national anthem?
In Sri Lanka, it is the macro development planning that initiates the production of urban physical spaces. Architects claim to the right to take part in creating such urban physical spaces is the objective of this webinar. Our worldview has changed since 17 November 2019. The lifestyle as well as the connection to the physical space around other human beings have made many think about redesigning the way we live, work and patronize the facilities of the house, neighborhood, township and the city as a whole. Perhaps the famous quotation by Sir Winston Churchill is valid in the scenario of global pandemic. We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. If so, architects can reshape the diseased cities when the needs of citizens change. It is argued here that creative thinking of architects, urban designers and planners in spatial planning take account of spatial dimensions of economics to cause the wealth distribution or positioning of people and their activities. Therefore, designing and restructuring the neighborhoods, townships and cities we live in will create a socio-economic impact. Therefore, the need of the hour is to reimagine the role and the paradox of the current practice of architecture in relation to production of urban space. It's all too common to hear that we as professionals are powerless to affect the industry due to lack of agency, that is, capability to act by themselves. The mission is to claim the right to take part in creating the social space. Thinking outside the box, the new agency will be a union of companionship with politicians, policymakers, other experts and end users that will address the societal problems. The word proposition is preferred to speculation, and the modes of delivery shall be subtle and gentle as territorial jiu-jitsu in the commercial world of speculative development. The events unfolding around the world are undeniably urgent and significant. The challenges that we face are monumental in scale. We are living through a socio-political, economical, and a medical crisis never encountered before. Therefore, this ECPD has invited experts in the fields of architecture, urban design, planning, and economics to create new synergies for engagement in producing new urban inclusive spaces. This will be the new spatial agency to conceive the notion of right to the city.
Before we begin today's proceedings, could I please invite our panel to seat themselves at the head table? Dr. Vageesha Gunasekara, Architect Professor Chitra Vedikara, Architect Dr. Lochana Gunaratna, Architect Professor Indrika Rajapaksha, Architect Dr. Upendra Rajapaksha, Architect Professor Lal Balasurya, Architect Harshan De Silva, Architect Pali Vijayaratna, Architect Dr. Janaka Vijay Sundara, Architect Hiranti Velendave, Architect B.B. Navaratna, and Architects Randhani and Dr. Senaka. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first ECPD Q&A session for 2020-2021 on the topic Inclusive Cities, how social justice can be brought to the production of space in the city. Today's panel comprises a diverse group of professionals who are experts in the fields of sociology, economy, and architecture, and have compared today's topic against themes of socioeconomy, geopolitics, and spatial urban development. Here to welcome you all and explain today's topic of inclusive cities, please welcome Architect Upendra Randhania, Chairman of the Professional Affairs Board, SLIA.
Welcome to the first ECPD, which is live streamed on YouTube. I take this opportunity to thank resource persons providing recording and attending the Q&A session, council members, PAB members, CPD committee, to making this event a success. Special thanks go to the member, Madhava Dharmatilaka, son of architect Senaka, who helped us to edit this presentation. Sponsor Teyan Lanka Steel Company Private Limited. Usually CPTs are conducted here, physical forum with at least 250 members, followed by a Q&A session. Due to lockdown, this format was changed, allowing 1,500 members to remain at home and use the web portal for viewing. This will be the new mode of conducting CPDs in the future. Most other professionals have done this already. Besides the CPDs, which usually happens at least 4 or 5 every year, we also have a national conference, which is held annually, and we invite experts to contribute their knowledge on a selected topic. The new topic is selected every year and discussed in detail. While this allows discussion on new topics, it does not allow continuity. However, some national issues demand continuous attention, such as this topic. Social justice can be brought to production of space in the city. If you listen to the talks that were delivered, you will notice that they are very complex and the solutions are elusive. It seems that we all agree in principle that there should be justice in the city development. It appears that each of us differ when it comes to how to achieve it. Therefore, we urgently need a common language that we could understand among the divisions that we already have. Policy planning, national physical plan, planning, urban design, architecture, and the vast majority who doesn't have a voice. So what we suggest is SLI to take the lead and create a lingua franca, that is a language that all of us understand in order to link these little dots that are scattered. The purpose of being to facilitate communication among interested parties to carry out the message and to bridge the gap between the bottom, the people, and the policymakers at the top. So I use this chance to tell the membership that we need to have a similar topic on our agenda of CPDs, where this theme is continued, and we can have sub-themes every year, so that there is a continuity, and we become the leader in creating this language to talk to the interested parties. The event unfolding around the world are undeniably urgent and significant. Challenges that we face are monumental in scale with COVID. Thus, I suggest that we create a spatial agency where knowledge-based, evidence-based research is presented next year. We will refer to research that will take place as well as projects that is specific to the Sri Lankan context, both in terms of policy and design. This gives SLI a new agenda, that is to communicate this message to the public and the policymakers that we take part in looking after the voiceless. This will be the legacy of the PAB 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Architect Randinya. Before we begin session 1, please also welcome our moderator for the evening, Architect D.B. Navaratna, Consultant Architect, Conservator and Urban Designer, and our expert panel for the evening, starting with Architect Dr. Senaka Dharmatilaka, Chairman of the Continuous Professional Development Committee, who provided an introduction into today's topic, where he claims that production of space in the city has always been a struggle. This is further explained in 3 separate theories, namely Pierre Bourdieu's concept of habitus defines this as an accumulation of capital, economical, social, cultural, symbolic capitals. André Lefebvre introduced the concept of surplus accumulation, identifies lived, perceived, conceived space, and right to the city. David Harvey's talks of planetary urbanization in relation to global processes.
So with these narratives of Lefebvre and Harvey, we hear how in the West, how these oligarchic political influences on the urban development, how they disenfranchise the urban citizens right to the city and in the transformation of urban spaces. Now, however, we have witnessed our comparative successes that we have achieved in controlling these current epidemic situations, which is in contrast to the Western approaches. And here we could see how our welfare state policies, as opposed to the laissez-faire policies of the neoliberalistic West, would have different results. And so similarly, we need to see how our focus, the scale and the proportion of our investment in state-sponsored affordable housing as a ray of hope, so to speak. So we discussed how Bourdieu explains the role played by capital in the struggle for the right to the city in terms of social capital, cultural capital and financial capital. But in contrast, how we may see, how we may remain optimistic in a civilization such as ours, in a civilization that believes in spiritual capital, people who believe in the spiritual bank accounts, investing in spiritual bank accounts, etc., where we treat the needy, the helpless, as a moral obligation rather than a legal obligation. How the urban poor amidst the population that engages in making such deposits in spiritual bank accounts, how would they be treated? And we have seen this mass sentiments of our nation, which is rich with values of compassion, which we have demonstrated not only in the situations of crisis, of natural calamities, but also in the field of war, field of battle. And it is in this, in the midst of this mass scale real estate development in our city centers, how do we see or how do we remain hopeful that there will be innovative urban development policies will be formulated at a broader scale or at a macro scale, which would ensure the welfare of our underprivileged communities who populate our major cities. Where would they fit in our grand schemes, and how would the economic prosperity or the wealth we gain by this mass growth be trickled down to them, or how would they form part of this great big picture of us, of a great big future and a great big urban future? Thank you.
And start with that Dr. Senaka Dharmatilaka's introductory note, but I would like you to go through the total lecture or total presentation that he made in the recordings. So you better if you have not read, I think it is best that you read it or listen to it rather, and then comprehend what doctor is trying to say. I'm very grateful because your he has brought in vivid theoretical knowledge into one place to discuss this issue what we are discussing today. So I'm very thankful, and it will be okay. It will be also be very helpful for architectural and urban design students or planning students, for them to get a basic understanding of what the questions that we are discussing and the theoretical background of that. So thank you, Senaka, for that excellent presentation that you have done in the YouTube. So on that, I have okay, I'll first explain how I'm going to conduct this moderation of these lectures. First, the summary, like what we did, will come in, and then after that, I will ask each and every panelist or the speaker a set of questions, or one question or one or two questions. Unfortunately, some of them are missing here. What I'm trying to do is trying to bring out certain conclusions at the end of our it's very difficult task for you to bring in conclusions of these sort of subject area, but at least some understanding so that we know where to focus and when to focus. So I think that is what my intention is today. We will see how we will succeed. Something fascinated me with Dr. Senaka's listening to his total speech was that you're saying that some of the contextual factors you are bringing in are perhaps contrary to the theories that we are looking at, or not contrary, okay, maybe complementary, or you can tell me what it means. Say, for example, you are bringing in religious thinking into, say, the picture, and the equity, social equity, sometimes is accepted in the parts of South Asian and the Sri Lankan region, considered it as a, because religion gives you a background to justify the situation. And that is something interesting which is not written in any of those books that you have referred to. So sometimes we do not fight, or we do not ask for our position in the urban context, our position in terms of spatial as well as activity. We don't ask it because we accept our position, and particularly majority Buddhists, but even Christians, Sri Lankans, and there are also Hindus. All of them have this religious and cultural background which sets you for this sort of mindset. Now that accept certain things that will be considered as unjust in another part of the world, which is written by them in their books and those other theories that we read. And having said that, then some of the references that you have made it into Marxisms and Marxism-based spatial theories, and those are well known theories. So in this context, my first discussion point for you to react to is, do you think that in South Asian context, do we have to work out our own theories and our own way of looking at this equity issue? Because the way that we are looking at in a socialist environment or a communist environment or a European environment might be different to ours. So in that context, how do we, what do you think that we should be doing? And I'm linking this with Dr. Janaka, who is doing experiments and research on these fields. And when I come to that, I will link this up with him as well, the things that we are looking at, and say, can you respond to that? Can you think that, say, is there a difference in what the Western or rather the political or those approaches and our approach should be in our cultural and religious context?
Thank you, sir. Yes, actually speaking, what we need to look at is not only the difference between the East and the West, not only about space. Yes, the space differentiates different cultural clusterings, socio-religious clusterings, which have different norms, beliefs, and especially values. I think values would be the key thing to look at. And also, not only space, but also time. Now, the problem of most of us is we are looking at certain, our problems in terms of theoretical frameworks given by different cultures, especially the West. Even this fluidity that is brought in by time is not only specific to the regions, but within the same region itself, you will see how these values change. For an example, now David Harvey would look at how the West itself, the capitalist exploitation changes even from the time Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848 to the current days. For an example, the capitalist structures as well as the structures of labor has changed significantly. If you take the 1960s to 70s, the biggest employer of US labor were three companies: General Motors, which is automobile industry, Ford, again automobile industry, and US Steel, heavy industries. Now, in the current days, what are who are the main employers of the major employers of US labor? First, Walmart, Megamart company, right? And then the holding company of McDonald's, and the holding company of Kentucky Fried Chicken, or KFC. Now, this labor, the structures of labor itself has changed even within their own geographic territories. And the levels of exploitation, the modes of exploitation have changed drastically from one area to the other. Now, you can look at this, even this difference that you'll have to see in not looking at the Sri Lankan context or the Eastern context in terms of the Western theoretical framework, could be seen even in terms of how the deployment labor and the structuring of labor has changed there, right? So my answer is yes. In terms of adopting theoretical frameworks, our failure so far have been that we are adapting alien frameworks of analysis into specific locality because we generalize these theoretical frameworks. Now, similarly, you can see how even the geographic distribution of labor. Now, normally, people would look at labor as and exploitation as happening on the factory floors, just like the 60s to 50s, 60s to 70s. But now he looks at how the labor, just like the structures of labor has changed, the exploitation happens not only in terms of their efforts and the contribution in terms of work, but also in terms of time. How these structures have changed so much. I'm taking only one example as a case study, just to show how these theoretical frameworks cannot be kind of used by generalization in certain areas, like what Dr. Vagisha would say. Cities are built on capitalist structures, and capitalist structures are built on social inequalities and environmental injustices. Fantastic way of looking at it, actually. So while we have this theoretical framework on a macro scale, but the modes and means of exploitation have changed. And in answer, what I have to say is, in finding answers, we may need to change our lenses, or the the spectacles we look at the specific environments, without strictly adhering to the theoretical approaches or theoretical frameworks taken to analyze the cities, the built environments, and how this exploitation happens on societies. I hope that gives a general answer. I would expect Dr. Janaka to kind of continue on the rest.
Thank you. I think we came into a good point where we are trying to say that, of course, we learn in theory, lots of theories, Western theories and Eastern theories, everything. But at the end, as a professional, one should do contextualization of this. I think that is what is expected out of us. So I think that is somewhere that I want to direct this discussion, because almost everybody was talking of theory, but then it has a little bit of unmatch or certain condition which we can't say sometimes put into practice. Sometimes that is where we, Dr. Seneka, sometimes that is where we went wrong, because we learn theory and in the schools, and then we try to apply it on the ground, and we have not made it contextualized. And I think this is where I will get in with Dr. Janaka. How do we get on to the, say what are the common features that we could get from these theories while contextualizing the answers? So that is something that I will leave for the moment. Then we'll have Dr. Vagisha. Is there a presentation on that?
Thank you, Dr. Seneka. Our next panelist, Dr. Vagisha Gunasekara, is a senior lecturer at the Department of Social Studies at the Open University of Sri Lanka and the executive director of the American Institute for Lankan Studies. Her topic was a critical overview of the effects of urbanization in Sri Lanka, socio-political and economic paradigms, in which she claims that the kind of research and evidence that we should produce is the kind that allows us to understand social reproduction through spatial or infrastructure realities. We need to better understand how the processes of infrastructure development, coupled with market forces, are reconstructing people's identity, livelihoods, and ways of life, and thereby the kind of state-society relations we have.
I recently had a conversation with the CEO of a top garment manufacturer. We talked about their impressive eco-friendly green initiatives. But when I asked whether they have thought of apportioning some of that budget that goes towards sustainability practices towards increasing the pay scales of the workers, in other words, better pay for the workers, he was not very keen. Now, he said, well, that affects the bottom line, he said. What I'm trying to say here is that it's not enough to promote the recycling of plastic bottles in cities without questioning the privatization of water, for example. The so-called triple bottom line, allegedly reconciling profits, planet and people, the triple bottom line, often sums up into reshaping environmental crisis to the market's ends. The main reason why social justice is often an afterthought is because capitalist processes are built on social inequalities. And of course, environmental injustices are also part and parcel of capitalist processes. When state and planning institutions claim to be concerned with equity, we need to pay careful attention to whether these concerns and initiatives are based on delivering equitable outcomes in the first place. Drawing on Henri Lefebvre's The Right to the City and observing the tension between the three pillars of sustainability, we need to think about a new centrality, a new urban society, a different urban mode of production, one that embodies social justice and ecological consciousness. Urban transitions motivated by green neoliberalism will only aggravate existing polarizations, because this kind of urban transition rides on the backs of people living in the periphery of the urban economy and living in the periphery of the urban society. A just transition will improve transportation for all and create new green jobs, but it will also give voice and agency to the people. This is not just about planning for the future. We have to factor in the past and the present social injustices and make an effort to rectify them. Urbanization should not be an excuse to disguise or ignore exploitative practices of the current economic model that drives it. As David Harvey states, we cannot resolve difficulties by pretending that they do not exist. Such an approach has been in practice for so long, in fact too long. The urban transition that we must work towards must not leave behind social justice. Balancing social justice and environmental protection with regards to urbanization must go hand in hand. And if we come up with a long-term formula to achieve this, the outcome, no doubt, will be revolutionary and transformative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I sat through total your talk, and I was listening it very carefully, and I think I listened twice. Because it is so fantastic that you are trying to connect context of economic, social, and political changes and trying to bring it into urban context and not being a spatial professional, like space creating professional. So it is very enlightening that what you discussed. I had a issue, and you gave a sort of an answer at the end of your summary. The word was revolutionary, because how much we try in the existing system that this unjust we might not be able to defeat, because it's very difficult revolution, because it is not only that Sri Lanka or this country or the Asian region is trapped with. It is a global trap that we are in. So that is why I think global environmental organizations, Habitat, and different global organizations are also trying to address these issues. So in that sense, I still don't see what sort of a revolution that we are talking of, because say you in the main body of your talk, you're talking of the patchworks won't do. It is true, because what we are doing is we are showing, say, as the example that you took with the, say, these companies which are doing social justice and all that, because they're not, they're just showing off that we are doing it. And even isn't the capitalist free market economy driven governments are also doing the same in a different way. So what is the revolution that we are looking and expecting, and how do you propose, say, to do it?
Thank you for that question, Chair. Well, I think what I have to say in response is neither profound nor anything new. I think all of you in this audience have heard these things, and it's also, it may sound very utopian once again, not too different from what I say in the video. I think the kind of revolution that I'm talking about is one that we rethink this idea of progress, how we understand progress. And what I'm proposing is a change in our entire operating system of the economy. And we actually have a great example in front of us, that is nature. I mean, if you look at living systems that have existed for a couple of billion years, few billion years, materials flow, one species' waste is another one's food, right? Energy is provided by the sun, things grow and die, and nutrients return to the soil. That's the natural system, and this is cyclical, it's circular. But humans, us, we have adopted an economic system and a life that is linear, not circular, right? We take, we make, and we dispose. Like our phones. We have a phone. Once we are tired of it, once it's out of date, we toss it and we get a new one, right? We move in a linear way, defying nature. So this economic system that is quite linear, we are eating into finite resources and often producing toxic waste, a huge problem in urban locations. So can't we think of maybe a circular economy that mimics the natural operating system? I know this might sound really idealistic to all of you who, I mean, to me too, it sounds very idealistic, but this is not my idea. These ideas are circulating around the world. Can waste build capital? That's a question we could ask. Can the goods of today become resources of tomorrow? Instead of throw and replace, can we think of, adopt an attitude maybe to return and renew things? So this also means we have to rethink this idea of ownership. We don't really own technologies or things, but we simply license them. Can we think of a system like that? So what that means is it's an economic system where the product comes back to the maker. You reuse the technical material. The biological waste or the biological material is used to improve agriculture. All the goods are transported using renewable energy, right? Of course, this sounds utopian because none of us know a world like this, right? But then, so this is, what I'm proposing is the circular economy, but for this to work, everybody has to do it. It can't be that one company does it and the rest of them don't. And it also means that we have to interconnect all the companies and industries that form or contribute to our infrastructure. So in a sense, what I'm proposing is the circular economy is about rethinking our operating system that entails three things, which is design out waste and pollution. Number two is keep products and materials in use, right? And number three, regenerate natural systems. So I suppose that's the sort of the revolutionary model that I have read about, that I have, and actually companies are doing this. currently, it's not pie in the sky, or it's not infeasible. Does that answer your question, at least provisionally?
Yeah, I know it's a difficult question because, I mean, nobody can answer in one sentence or within 5 minutes to that question. But I think you touched a very nice point. I think progressive understanding, that is something that we need to get. I don't think it's only, say, in our context, Sri Lankan context, but this understanding of the context and what is going on will bring out the answers, actually. But I think the issue here is that ignorance is the issue, because we do not understand what is happening around us, and so therefore we don't know what to change and when to change and where to change. So I think I will, if you bring back into the spatial context of this, that I think professionals as architects, planners, and urban designers, those who are here, we should be aware and vigilant about that, so that we try to give this understanding to general public, because this revolution cannot be done by the professionals themselves. The revolution should come from the society itself. So that it is our duty in that sense, my conclusion is that as much as possible, as per our ability, we must inform the community and the society, this is what is going on, and therefore we should change it, so that first we have to dissipate, or say we have to give information to them, and then they will come back and tell us, okay, you do it, right? So I think that's maybe the tactic or strategy that we could use in this context. So I will thank you again. Yes, you have a point, yes.
Just add a little thing, and that is just in response to, what I was saying, and then also what you were saying. We talk about urbanization and social justice, and we like to use Lafay and Right to the City and all that, but I have read several global discourses on right to the village as well. So maybe another way of thinking differently about space and social justice is to focus on not to be so urban-centric when it comes to planning and design. Instead of having this sort of urban-centric spatial bias, why don't we try and understand why urbanization happens in the first place, right? And then that takes us all the way back to the rural areas, the decline of the rural economies and the social inequalities between the dominant and the dominated in the rural areas. So, and that's what causes the growing mobility to the cities, and then in turn the inequalities that you see in the cities. So I would just like to stop with that, saying that maybe as much as it's important to talk about right to the city, maybe we should also think about right to the village, because you can't really separate these two from each other.
Thank you for that comment. Actually, it leads to two other speakers who have spoken. I think this links to some of Professor Balasuriya's thinking as well as Dr. Lochana Gunaratna's thinking. I think, we will discuss this, what you just touched upon on urban and on the rural contexts, and they have got some ideas and thoughts about this, and we will discuss when we come to those speakers. And thank you. And it's nice that you another professional, another thinker comes out of this, and then we would be able to discuss this in the same table with other two professionals here, and on the same lines. So I leave it at that, and then I'll get into with Professor Chitra Vedikara's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Vagisha. Next, we welcome architect QS Professor Chitra Vedikara, who is a past president of SLIA and is also the dean of the Colombo School of Construction Technology. Her expertise in building economics and current construction trends was expanded under her topic, Equity in Urban Growth and Building Economics, where she states that equity be redefined under the paradigms of justice, distribution of wealth, and social protection.
So equity is one of the most important aspects in any developing country or even in developed countries. That means equity for urban equity for all those people who live in the cities, whether you are rich or poor. And also there is something called City for Life that has been brought by the Seventh Urban Forum which I think is a fantastic concept, City for Life. So as far as we are concerned, as architects, engineers, conservators, we must look at this phenomenon of urban equity in development, and it is an important phenomenon. Unequal cities have difficulties to optimize, and therefore it is difficult for them to achieve this concept, cities for life. So we as architects, the answer is equity development. How do we go about equity development? Making sure that there is a framework, there is a national policy, and also policy has various projects that are useful to the urban people, right? And then making sure that architects, engineers, conservators, and urban designers, urban planners, that we as to promote urban equity and development of cities and enhance this concept called City for Life. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think equity is, right topic for Professor Vedikara because she always give all of us equal standards, and I know, that's her character. So equity is nothing new to you, madam. I say it is true that we all talk in this equity in these terms. However, I think achieve equity in a free market economic context, where wealth distribution is not controlled, and therefore the gap between have and have-nots is increasing and ever increasing. So in this context is the context in which that we work and that we try to bring this equity in place. Professor, I know it's a hard question if I ask how do you do this, because it's a absolutely conceptual or utopian answer that you will have to give. But what I'm asking is, what do you think, because we have been in this economy from 1977, if I call it right, and we are now getting into the we are experiencing the outcomes of this economic system that we have been adopting. So in this context, what is missing? What are the parts we might not be able to resolve it 100%? But is there anything that we could do to come closer to this concept that you were talking of?
Thanks, Nawa. Equity for me is leveling the playing field politically, socially, and economically. But it is one of the most difficult things in any country, even in Sri Lanka. So I think in order to achieve equity, you must have a mindset of people, politicians, and the country as a whole. So I am not 100% sure, Nawa, how we can achieve it in the current context. But if you're looking at communism or anything like that, that kind of thing always gives a level playing field to everybody. But in a democratic society, I don't think you can ever achieve equity for everyone. But what we can do is, as you say, reduce the impact of this for the poor. Because, for example, in the City for Life, what we are looking at is everybody should be able to live in that city so that most of the infrastructure, most of the functions, most of the facilities are available to people. But people's culture, people's attitudes, change this equity equation. For example, you know that if you have slum development in closer to any of our high-rise developments, nobody will buy those apartments, okay? Because that is a social stigma. So how do we do that? So that is where the government also must be inclusive in terms of social justice, equity, and find what kind of trade-offs that we can give so that you can balance them. But as human beings, we will never ever be satisfied with what we get. So equity is one of those questions I think is the most difficult thing or concept that is very, very difficult to have in a society. So I feel that we have to come together and make sure that we can work towards it. But I'm not sure in my lifetime whether there will be any way in which every person who is very poor has the same thing that the rich has, because it will never happen. Unless, of course, we have a dictatorship and everybody says, you do it, you do it, you do it, and that's the only way. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. That brought us into say, your example brought us into a new avenue of thinking. That is, say, occupation of occupying space. How do we occupy space? Because, as you said, rich and the poor. Say, it's not also expected equal. Say, and there is, say, in this context, say, due to power, could be monetary, could be political, could be religious, etc., etc. And this democratic system allows it to exist within the system, so that positioning of your locational positioning of your power, and as Seneca little time ago said, in time, because certain times, certain powers will be in high, and they will occupy certain spaces whether we like it or not. So I think equity on that controlling is another task by itself. So I think how do we bring the society into an equal status or equity or spatial equity is in question. So I think we'll have to accept that context and then see within that how do we find the answers. So thank you, Professor, for your contribution. So let's go to the next speaker. That is Professor Willy Mendes. Professor Willy Mendes is not here, but I think we have a clip, is it? We do have. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Chitra. Although Professor Willy is not present, I will be presenting his summary as well. Professor Willy Mendes is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Moratuwa, as well as the past President of the Engineering, Architecture and Surveying Section, Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science. Professor Mendes discussed the topic, a fresh look at the implementation strategies, which he states that the aims and objectives of the National Physical Plan is to integrate the internal elements into a production approach for the economy to grow, and that the National Physical Plan is developed and updated regularly to match the National Policy Plan. Highlighting the gaps between the two entities, he suggests the need to bridge the gap. Unfortunately, Professor Mendes was not able to attend today's session due to an unavoidable circumstance. Now we welcome architect Dr. Loshana Gunaratna.
Can I make a small comment on Professor Willy Mendes's paper or presentation, which is in the YouTube? And you could read through that and then say, one of the points that, although he say, you know, he's very polite and very politely telling, say, in his speech, a very strong point. What he is trying to say is very unfortunate for us to hear this also. We sometimes have a economic and financial policy, development policies and things like that, but then it is not represented in the physical plan, or there's no combination of that, or in the implementation it fails. So this is a fundamental issue, I think, as all Sri Lankans, professionals and us should be very considerate of. He puts it in very lighter and smaller words, but it's a big issue. Because if you have an economic or financial or political or what policy it is, and then it has to be on ground, it has to be related in a physical planning process and then implementation process. So what he is basically saying is that is lacking in our country, and we as professionals should try to resolve it, try to get into the system and try to find answers, because what he see is that we are out of the administrative and political system as professionals. So as far as we stay there, we will not be able to bring out a change. So that is what he's briefly saying, I think. That is something that I would like to conclude with, yes.
Thank you, sir. Now we welcome architect Dr. Lochana Gunaratna, who is a past president of the Sri Lanka Institute of Architects and also past president of the Sri Lanka Association for the Advancement of Science. His topic was ensuring equitable urban growth in managing urbanization, in which he argues that evidence-based research on low and middle-income countries, LMIC, indicates that poverty-driven rural push is more than the urban pull. The need of the hour is to initiate mechanisms to promote medium and small towns in the rural sector as service centers to reduce the urban migration.
It must thus be concluded that urbanization in the LMICs can be equitable and a phenomenon of great good for all, provided it is directed less to the larger cities than to the mid-sized urban places. This can be achieved through sound and focused urban planning. Now, in the light of the foregoing discussion, the key recommendations relating to the need for the intervention through national policies on urbanization in the LMICs are: 1. The promotion of planned urbanization as opposed to the reliance on market forces and or ad hoc planning. 2. The concurrent focus on agriculture and rural development to ensure that urbanization will be an equitable process. 3. The planned development of small towns with efficient urban governance to provide equitable access to social and economic infrastructure for their residents, and also, importantly, for their respective rural hinterlands. 4. The planned development of medium-sized towns with efficient urban governance to function as ready target locations for rural migrants as alternatives to primary cities. 5. And the last, the need to recognize the serious health hazards that are inherent and hard to combat in dense ghettoized populations in large cities, especially in the context of a pandemic. These recommendations, if implemented, will surely help us in managing urbanization for equitable urban growth in the LMIC. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I think you are one of the say persons who has brought some answer to the question that we are dealing with. So I think we have to take this your proposal very seriously and discuss it further, because what you are trying to say basically with your 5 or 6 recommendations, but basically this push-pull factor to be balanced, at one point, and so that you get the equitable answer. I have a small question on acceptability due to the, say, Sri Lankan, of this in Sri Lankan context, because still we have the, say, all Sri Lankans have this mentality of coming into the city, having a greater choice for their, say, all needs. They will have a greater choice, and they would like to come into the main city and occupy that, and that becomes their, say, sort of big thing to say about, okay, I'm in Colombo, or I'm in Kandy, and I'm living in this particular place, and that is, that factor is there. That's sort of cultural or egoistic and that sort of thing. So in this concept of, say, trying to pull them back into the smaller scales or smaller cities, what do you think is it, say, will with all these facilities getting into these smaller or townships, do you think that it will change our mindset? What do you think, Doctor?
Well, I don't think that it is possible to give all the facilities that are in large cities into make it available to all people in the rural sector. But what we can do is to move towards providing some of the facilities. That's to answer your particular question. This can be done. You know, it is impossible to think of rural areas, say some rural village, having all the facilities that are available in a city. It's impossible, you know. So what you can do is to provide certain towns with the facilities, particularly the social infrastructure. That is, schools and medical facilities, health facilities, at central locations to a few rural areas, to villages. And this can make it possible for these people to have access to this. But if they want to have more, they can move to medium-sized cities, you know, or there will be a range of cities, small, medium, and large cities. So this is possible. As a matter of fact, in our National Physical Plan, which was done originally in 2007, these small and medium-sized cities are mentioned. Not only mentioned, they are mapped and indicated. What we have not done is to implement those plans. You know, if we implement those plans, there will be a much greater level of equity available to the rural folk. Now, this will also reduce the number of people who have no alternative but to come into the big cities like Colombo. I mean, they come with hopes, but it is very difficult to satisfy those hopes when they get here because they become ghettoized into shanty communities. And it is, I mean, they become subject to, fortunately in Sri Lanka, things are not as bad as they would be in India. But in that ghettoized situation, they are susceptible to health risks and so on. You know, so many problems are there. So they come with hopes, but those hopes are not necessarily realized, So that is why I'm suggesting that we look at the small and medium-sized cities, and we can very easily provide facilities which will enable these people to enjoy more equity. That's what I have to say to your question.
Thank you. One more question from you, because I think you have touched two areas, not only this. Another one, the number one recommendation that you have given is, say, planned cities than on the market-driven cities. But in the context of ours at the moment, we are market-driven, and that is what the fact is. That is what the, say, sometimes political influence is also on. So as a professional group, if we are advocating this non-market driven planned city forms, are we in a strong position to counter this, Doctor?
Yes, of course. I feel that you can, The market is a different situation. We are talking about intervention, and we have representation of rural folk, political representation of rural folk, and I don't think that those political personnel should forget who has voted them in, So, yes, I think in a democratic situation, you can do that.
Thank you, Doctor. Let's get on with the next speaker.
Thank you, Doctor.